the responses have been catastrophically inane. And that is a major challenge for humanity, given that what Trump is doing is he's truly upending the monetary system as we've known it and the global trading system as we've known it.
Well, at 4 p.m. last night, Donald Trump celebrated Liberation Day at the White House in the Rose Garden, finally rolling out the specifics of his secretive, much-awaited tariff agenda. Here's a little bit of what he said.
In a few moments, I will sign a historic executive order instituting reciprocal tariffs on countries throughout the world. Reciprocal, that means they do it to us and we do it to them. Very simple, can't get any simpler than that. From 1789 to 1913, we were a tariff-backed nation, and the United States was proportionately the wealthiest it has ever been. So wealthy, in fact, that in the 1880s, they established a commission to decide what they were going to do with the vast sums of money they were collecting. We were collecting so much money so fast, we didn't know what to do with it. Isn't that a nice problem to have? What do you think, Marco? Good problem? Marco would love that problem. But we don't have that problem anymore, but we're not going to have it very much longer, I will tell you. But they collected so much money, they actually formed a commission to determine what they were going to do with the money, who they were going to give it to, and how much. Then in 1913, for reasons unknown to mankind, they established the income tax so that citizens, rather than foreign countries, would start paying the money necessary to run our government. We take care of countries all over the world. We pay for their military. We pay for everything they have to pay. And then when you want to cut back a little bit, they get upset that you're not taking care of them any longer. But we have to take care of our people, and we're going to take care of our people first. And I'm sorry to say that. And today we're standing up for the American worker, and we are finally putting America first.
NPR reported, quote, President Trump has unveiled sweeping reciprocal tariffs on goods from the world over, plus a 10% baseline tariff on U.S. imports from all countries, as he seeks to reshape decades of U.S. trade policy, despite warnings of higher costs for American businesses and consumers. NPR goes on to add, the president announced a 10% minimum tariff to apply to goods from all countries. However, certain trading partners will face higher reciprocal tariffs aimed at penalizing them for their trade barriers. Those taxes on imported goods are calculated on a country-by-country basis, and the levels Trump announced for some trading partners are substantial. He said plans to impose 34% tariffs on China, 20% on the European Union, and 24% on Japan, among an array of other trading partners. So Trump rolled out this declaration with April 5th and April 9th start dates under his emergency powers. He hedged a bit on whether markets would remain high during his tenure as well, which is quite interesting coming from Trump. But this is an ideological commitment of the president's dating back decades before even he officially entered American politics. Eamon Javers of CNBC made a very interesting point on X after the ceremony. Quote, the political problem for the Trump administration is simple. Economic pain from the tariffs will come almost immediately, but the gain long-term restructuring of the economy will take years, he said. Economist Yanis Varoufakis, formerly the Greek finance minister, wrote in our pages at Unheard a fantastic piece shortly before the president's speech with a word of caution for the alarmists. Quote, commentators should know better than to pretend that the shock Trump is now delivering is both, quote, unprecedented and bound to fail like all reckless assaults on the prevailing order, he wrote. The Nixon shock, said Yanis, was more devastating than the one delivered today, especially for Europeans, and precisely because of the economic devastation caused, its architects achieved their main long-term objective, to ensure American hegemony grew alongside America's twin, trade and government budget deficits. Yanis added, the Trump shock is pushing us into a bisected planet, one part of it comprising of vassal countries that have yielded to the Trump plan, and a second part where the BRICS experiment is allowed to take its course. Yanis Varoufakis is an economist and former Greek Minister of Finance. He's the author of several best-selling books, most recently Another Now, Dispatches from an Alternative Present. He joins us today on Undercurrents with reaction to the massive announcement in the Rose Garden yesterday. Yanis, thank you for being here.
My pleasure.
It's been a busy 24 hours. We are now in the day after Liberation Day. So, what's your reaction to the announcement Donald Trump actually made yesterday? There's so much speculation going into it about what would happen, but how do you react now that we know more of the specific contours of his plan?
It was utterly predictable. He had staked out the territory that he was going to invade, and he has invaded it. And now we have to make sense of what he's trying to do. We have to avoid the project fear that's coming from the liberal establishment. They resemble headless chickens running around panicking, utterly incapable of understanding that the man has a plan. I personally loathe his plan, but to dismiss him as an inarticulate fool, which he may be, but to dismiss his whole team as not knowing what they're doing, is a gross error, which I think they will live to regret it. And here I'm talking about the Democrats in the United States, I'm talking about Macron in France, I'm talking about Ursula von der Leyen. The responses have been catastrophically inane. And that is a major challenge for humanity, given that what Trump is doing is he's truly upending the monetary system as we've known it and the global trading system as we've known it.
Can you flesh out that point? Because that's similar to what some of the hysterical analyses are saying, but you're saying it without the fear mongering. So if you could flesh out a little bit about why it's true that this is upending the financial system, but it is also sort of, when you understand it, I guess, different than the hysterics suggest.
Well, absolutely. Look, it's totally not unprecedented. Richard Nixon, on the 15th of August, 1971, this was something I expanded upon in my article in Unheard, shocked the world in a way that Trump cannot even begin to imagine competing with. The Nixon shock was much more devastating than what Trump is doing. And he did upend the monetary system of the time, which the United States had painstakingly put together at the Bretton Woods Conference in 1944. This was the golden era of world capitalism between 1944 and 1971. The United States played this huge role in creating essentially a common currency area, a dollar zone, including Western Europe and Japan. And it was the pride and joy of the United States establishment and the European establishment. And Nixon blew it up. And he did it knowingly. Paul Volcker, who was a member of his advisory team in 1978, expounded on this. He said, you have a choice sometimes. Maintain the global order, or for your own purposes, pursuing your own national interest, proceed with a controlled disintegration of the world economy. That's a quotation, the controlled disintegration of the world economy. And indeed, and here's the delicious irony. If you look at the liberal establishment in Europe and the United States, what are they exactly lamenting? The passing of what world? It was the world that was created by the Nixon shock. So let us not pretend that this is unprecedented. It happened before. And what Trump's team is assuming, or this is their conviction, it is that the world needs another Nixon shock, this time they call it the Trump shock, in order to maintain American hegemony against the grain of the diminishing significance of the United States economy in a grander scheme of things. Now, whether he will succeed or not is another matter. Nixon succeeded at the great detriment of the American working class, at the great detriment of, to some extent, Japanese capitalism and Western Europe. Western Europe was, it took them 30 years to recover from the shock and to create the euro. The euro was the attempt of Europeans to respond to the Nixon shock. What is going to happen now as of yesterday? Well, that will depend on how people react to Trump. Let me just put it very briefly.
Yeah.
So, is Europe going to, in a state of panic, that Chinese exports will be diverted from the United States to avoid the tariffs to Europe? Is the European Union going to slap more tariffs on China? In other words, is the war, the tariff war that Trump has unleashed against the rest of the world, the entire world, Is this going to become a tariff war of all against all? And that will depend on whether the European Union decides to take an aggressive stand towards China, to which China will retaliate, or whether the European Union and China can come closer together in the same way that over the last few weeks we have seen quite a remarkable rapprochement between China and Japan and China and South Korea. So it depends on the rest of the world how they're going to respond to the Trump shock in exactly the same way that it depended in 1971 how they reacted to the Nixon shock.
Well, actually, on that point, I wanted to ask you about this post from Bill Ackman, who on X last night said the countries that make the first tariff deals with Trump will make the better deals. The countries that wait or retaliate will regret that they were not part of the early deal group or worse. What do you think of that?
I'm not sure I agree with this because Trump's conception of the world is that of a bicycle wheel, where he's the hub in the middle, and then there are different spokes. And he's going to negotiate with, he isolates every spoke separately. If he loses some spokes, the wheel still works, still turns. It doesn't matter to him very much who's going to be the first one. It's not a fixed sum or zero-sum game. He wants different things from different people. Now, the order or the sequence in which he's going to get them doesn't really matter that much. So no, this is the kind of tweet or post one uses in order to create even more panic in the minds of the weaker parties to this bargain. What I find fascinating is the attempt to have their cake and eat it. That is the Trump administration. They want to reduce the value of the dollar, which they are succeeding in doing, clearly, looking at the markets today, while at the same time they don't want to see the dollar losing its exorbitant privilege. So he wants to, let's say, bargain with the Japanese and get them to sell a large chunk of the $1.2 trillion that they have in savings without buying euros. Doing anything that will reduce the value of the dollar without undermining its reserve currency status. And with each country or economic bloc that they will negotiate, they will ask for different things. So, for instance, for Germany, they will say, don't you dare stop BASF or Mercedes from shifting their production plants to the United States. From the Chinese, they will demand other things. And, Trump is quite nonchalant. He says, well, if my negotiations with the Chinese in the end, or with the Malaysians or the Bangladeshis don't work out for me, well, at least I will have an income stream from the tariffs that they will be paying.
If we take Trump's stated goals seriously, I'm curious, Yanis, what you make of the likelihood that these tactics, the strategy, will actually achieve the goals that Donald Trump says he's trying to achieve with quote-unquote Liberation Day tariffs.
There's no doubt that he will succeed in achieving his objectives to some extent, to some magnitude. Already, there are plans by Germans, by Japanese, even by some Chinese business people to shift production to the United States. So there's going to be a flood of investment into the United States. There is going to be a reduction in the trade deficit of the United States. The question is, are the costs going to be greater than the benefits for Trump?
Right.
And allow me to say that I think from a political perspective, not so much from an economic perspective, Trump's greatest enemy, the thing that should keep him up at night with terrible nightmares, is the prospect of complete success. Because suppose he succeeds, I'm not saying he will, but suppose he succeeds beyond his own dreams to eliminate the trade deficit of the United States through these tactics. Let's say he doesn't, okay? He's going to have some very angry mates in the New York Stock Exchange and in the real estate market in Miami, in California, in Manhattan. Why? Because the trade deficit of the United States, as of the mid-1970s, to this day, has been operating as a huge vacuum cleaner that has been sucking the capital of the world, the profits of foreign capitalists, into New York and into the real estate markets of the United States. So if he eliminates the trade surplus, which is keeping the realtors and the financiers happy and plumb, he will have some very irate financiers and realtors knocking on his door. Uh, and he will have a terrible dilemma for him, delicious from my perspective, as one of his political enemies. He will have to choose whom to betray, the American working class that voted him in, or his mates in the financial and real estate sectors. I think you know what my guesses are.
Yeah, I mean, it's actually sort of the perfect test of the true soul of MAGA, now that you put it that way, Yanis. Can you talk to us a little bit more about what the potential costs could be, not just to, the financial sector, but when you're mentioning the American working class, sort of the core politically again of the Trump base, economically, even if there's this flood of investments coming into the U.S., we get more manufacturing jobs and people benefit from that. What other consequences, negative consequences, could the working class in the United States see as a result of the agenda Trump laid out last night?
Well, the worst case scenario for the working class in the United States is if this capital influx into the United States produces very few good quality jobs, but his tax cuts, which are coming, they haven't come yet, but they will hit the ground at some point, massively boost the income and therefore the bargaining power of employers when the labor market is not particularly boosted by whatever capital floods into the United States. Then the hard-pressed and impoverished working class that voted for him are going to be very disappointed with him, and they're going to essentially keep losing bargaining power and purchasing power like they have been since 1975, 1973. So that's the worst case scenario for the American working class. At the same time, it all depends. It's a system of equations, not just one equation in one unknown, because you have the tax cuts. Exactly what are they going to be? Social Security, food stamps. Let's not forget that if it weren't for Social Security and food stamps in the United States, the poverty line would engulf another 15-20% of the population. So what is he going to do with these? Are these going to be part of the savage cuts by Elon Musk and his Doge team? So it's all up in the air. And we are waiting with bated breath to find out what the the actual solution to that system of equations is.
Can I ask what you made of the rollout? Donald Trump is at the White House yesterday. He's got these big charts with all of these different countries, some of which are absolutely tiny, and people have mocked the formula that that they use to put the numbers up on the charts. It was quite a scene. I'm curious what you made of it, Yanis.
Well, as for the formula itself, the algebraic formula, it's really very simple. I mean, it is typical Trumpism that, he misidentifies variables, and he talked about the effective tariff, which he thinks that China and the European Union and Britain are imposing on American goods. There is no such thing in his calculation. His calculation is simply he takes the trade deficit, he divides it by the American imports from that particular country, and then divides that by 2. And that's the tariffs that he slaps on people. So it really doesn't matter whether you have a trade surplus to the United States because you are selling something to the United States that the United States could never get hold of, or because you are manipulating your currency or using unfair trade practices. But look, that whole scene at the Rose Garden yesterday was, I think it was a brilliant Goebbels-like propaganda performance. When, the liberal establishment looks at it with scorn and with contempt for the uncouthness and the kitsch nature of it, they're missing the point. It's meant to be uncouth. It's meant to be kitsch. He's talking to a particular clientele who actually love that kind of low-tech presentation. It's not that he doesn't have the capacity to use AI and beautiful graphics and to look like Bloomberg if he wants to. He knows what a Bloomberg screen looks like. He wants this ramshackle thing because this is what excites his base.
Right. Giannis, is there anything that you think is missing from the broader media conversation that we haven't covered yet, but that could be in the near future as a consequence of this? I mean, one of the takes, I wonder whether this was Bill Ackman who also posted this, the idea that Trump is a madman, right? He's intentionally being the madman, Kissinger-esque negotiator here, and people don't know exactly how far he's willing to go, with which country, and on what issue. Is there something that we're just missing that could happen in the next few weeks or few months that you think is outside of the media conversation right now?
Well, look, that he's certainly pretending to be mad, and there's no doubt about that. And this is the whole point about the madman strategy. You know, it is highly rational to pretend to be irrational, because that's how you scare the living daylights out of your opponents. Is he inarticulate? I think he is. Are his economic advisors inarticulate? No, they're not. If you read their stuff, they know what they're doing. They know their stuff. What I think is missing from, especially in Europe, is a very serious willingness to look inside themselves and look at their own problems. You see that Germany and Japan, which were creatures after 1945 of the United States Grand Plan known as Bretton Woods, they were created as surplus producing countries. This was their role in that American design. Well, that American design is now dead in the water, and the United States no longer is prepared to accept their surpluses. And what you don't have, this is what's missing in the media, in parliaments actually, in the public discourse, is a serious reconsideration by Europeans and by the British and by the Japanese and to some extent by the Chinese to say, okay, look, the era during which we lived on the American trade deficit is gone.
Right.
How are we going to rebalance our economy so we are no longer dependent on the United States? You have all this talk in the European Union about becoming independent of the United States in terms of military production and armaments, but no discussion about how they're going to stop the mercantilist process that keeps Germany totally dependent on the US trade deficit. And what this means in practice is, are they going to create in Europe a large-scale investment vehicle that converts the ample liquidity in the financial markets of Europe into productive investments? Because we haven't invested anything in the last 15, 20 years. That's why, Germany is now deindustrializing, because they can't compete with BYD. They cannot compete with, solar panels. They cannot compete with wind power coming from either the United States or China. So there's none of that discussion. The discussion is retaliation, as if the European Union, every time I hear Ursula von der Leyen saying, we have a very strong package of retaliatory measures. No, you don't. If you are running a 240 billion surplus with the United States, you will run out of things to tariff before he does. So cut it off and start looking, into the structural problems of your own economy. So until we do that, I think Trump can do anything he wants with us.
Yeah. Well, Yanis, thank you so much for your time in this very busy period. We appreciate it. This was super helpful.
You're most welcome.
Thank you for tuning in. Make sure to subscribe on YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts, and over at undercurrents.tv for full premium paywalled episodes of the show. This week we have James Billow back with us. We're excited for that. So make sure to subscribe, join the Undercurrents community if you are interested. We are so lucky to have a slice of Yanis's time in this very busy 24, 48 hour period on his end and on all of our ends. I'm sure everyone out there is busy as well and is busy reading this news, consuming it, and trying to figure out what may happen in the days and weeks to come. So we'll be here covering all of that. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll be back with more Undercurrents soon.